I am Madison, 33 years old and a forensic accountant who thought she had seen every financial scam in the book until my own family orchestrated the perfect heist against me. At 4 a.m., my banking app flashed a single red line reading "Access Denied." My $800,000 trust fund, secured by ironclad biometric locks, had vanished overnight. I called my mother in a panic. My father answered the phone, his voice softly terrifying, as he told me they had to step in because family comes first. My mother chimed in, claiming my mental state was unstable and I needed to let them manage my money. I did not argue. I hung up the phone, put on my sharpest blazer, and drove straight to my bank branch to wait for the doors to open. What my family did not realize was that stealing from a forensic auditor leaves a digital footprint, and I was about to follow it straight to their federal prison cell. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set boundaries with relatives who felt entitled to your hard-earned success. Growing up in Chicago, my parents Richard and Patricia projected an image of effortless wealth. We lived in a sprawling mansion, attended private schools, and took winter vacations to luxury resorts. But behind the designer clothes and country club memberships, our financial reality was a house of cards. My parents funded their lavish lifestyle through a dangerous cycle of borrowing, refinancing, and maintaining appearances at all costs. My sister Brittany absorbed this lesson perfectly. She played the role of the golden child, always needing the newest car and the best clothes to keep up with her wealthy friends. When Brittany married Jamal, an African-American tech founder with a flashy cryptocurrency startup, my parents were thrilled. Jamal talked a big game about venture capital and disruptive technology. He wore expensive watches and drove imported sports cars. But my trained eye saw the cracks. I analyzed balance sheets for a living, and Jamal carried all the hallmarks of a man drowning in corporate debt. I kept my distance, preferring the quiet stability of my own apartment and my demanding career investigating corporate fraud. My independence was fueled by a trust fund my late grandfather had established exclusively for me. He was a practical man who saw through my parents' financial irresponsibility. The trust was locked down tight, meant to be my safety net. For years, the balance sat securely at exactly $800,000. It was a Tuesday morning when my world shattered. I am an early riser, usually up by 4, to review case files before the city wakes up. Habit dictated that I check my personal accounts while my coffee brewed. I opened my banking app on my phone, scanning the familiar interface. My checking account was fine. My savings account looked normal. But when I scrolled down to the trust fund, my breath caught in my throat. The balance read 0. Underneath the bold 0 was a glaring red banner that read "Access Denied." My thumb hovered over the screen. I closed the app and reopened it, assuming it was a routine server glitch. The red banner remained. I logged in from my laptop, typing my credentials with shaking fingers. The result was exactly the same. The trust account was completely locked down and drained of every single cent. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my professional training immediately kicked in. Panic is the enemy of investigation. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times before the line clicked open. Instead of my mother, my father Richard answered. I asked him what was going on with my trust fund, keeping my voice remarkably steady. My father did not sound surprised. In fact, his voice was chillingly calm. "We had to step in, Madison," he said softly. "Family first. You have to understand that we are doing this for your own good." Before I could process the sheer audacity of his words, I heard my mother Patricia pick up the extension. Her voice dripped with condescending, fake concern. "You are not thinking clearly lately, Madison," she added. "Your mental state has not been stable. Crying over stress at work, withdrawing from family events. We just want to make sure your future is protected. Let us manage the money for safety." The names hit me like a physical blow. Richard and Patricia, my parents. The people who had brought me into this world had just stolen my future and were gaslighting me about my mental health to justify it. They were trying to weaponize a brief period of burnout I experienced years ago to paint me as incompetent. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not even argue with them. I simply pressed the end call button. I marched into my bedroom and pulled on my sharpest navy blue blazer. I tied my hair back into a tight bun, preparing for a professional confrontation. I grabbed my car keys, my laptop bag, and my building access badge. The sun was not even up yet, but I was not going to sit in my apartment waiting for them to spend my money. I drove downtown and parked my car right outside the main branch of my bank. I sat in the driver's seat, watching the digital clock on my dashboard slowly tick toward 8 in the morning. I reviewed everything I knew about banking protocols. To bypass a highly secure federal banking system and lock me out of a trust fund, they would have needed a legal document that required my explicit notarized consent. They would have needed a power of attorney. As soon as the bank doors unlocked, I stepped out of my car. I walked straight past the tellers and headed directly to the branch manager's office. I was not there to ask for my money back. I was there to conduct a forensic audit on my own family, and I was going to follow the digital trail no matter where it led. I pushed open the glass door to the branch manager's office without knocking. David looked up from his dual monitors, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his mouth. Before he could utter a single word of greeting, I dropped my driver license flat onto the center of his mahogany desk. The sharp smack of plastic hitting wood echoed in the quiet room. I sat down in the leather guest chair, crossed my legs, and stared at him with absolute deadly silence. David cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his tie. He knew exactly who I was. My trust fund made me a high-net-worth client at this branch, and he had personally managed my grandfather's estate transfers years ago. Madison. He started his tone adopting that overly gentle, placating cadence people use when dealing with a distressed patient. Your father called me yesterday afternoon. He mentioned you might come in today. He told me you have been under immense psychological strain lately, and that we should treat you with extra sensitivity. My parents had laid the groundwork perfectly. They had preemptively painted me as a hysterical, mentally unstable woman to discredit any objection I made regarding my own money. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of the supposed hysteria my father had warned him about. David. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am a forensic auditor for a top-tier financial firm in this city. I track missing millions across international borders for breakfast. I am not here for a therapy session. I am here because an $800,000 unauthorized withdrawal was executed from a secured trust. Pull up the power of attorney document used to bypass my biometric locks. Now. David hesitated, his eyes darting toward his computer screen. The withdrawal was entirely legal, Madison. The power of attorney was executed digitally 4 days ago, granting full financial control to Richard and Patricia. It passed all our internal compliance checks. Show it to me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his desk. If it passed compliance, you have no problem showing the principal account holder the execution log. David swallowed hard, clicked his mouse a few times, and turned his large monitor toward me. There it was. A standard, durable power of attorney form transferring absolute control of my assets to my parents. At the bottom was a digital signature bearing my name. I did not waste time reading the legal jargon. I immediately focused on the bottom corner of the digital document. This was executed via a remote online notary, I stated, reading the digital seal. In this state, an electronic notary requires 2 things to authorize a document of this magnitude: a time-stamped IP address log and a biometric video verification of the signer holding their government-issued ID. I locked eyes with David. Pull up the metadata, David. I want to see the IP address where this document was supposedly signed, and I want to watch the video of myself authorizing my own financial ruin. David sighed, typing rapidly on his keyboard. Madison, we reviewed the video. It is clearly you. The system verified your facial geometry against the ID. Play it, I commanded. A small video window popped up on the screen. It was me. Or rather, it looked exactly like me. The woman on the screen was holding up a driver license reciting the standard legal consent script authorizing the transfer of power. The voice sounded like mine, matching my cadence and pitch perfectly. But my trained eyes caught what the bank's automated compliance software had missed. Pause the video right there, I instructed, pointing at the screen. David hit the spacebar. Look at the jawline, I said, my tone clinical and detached. Right where the lighting hits the edge of the cheek. There is a pixelation blur, a micro-rendering error. The lighting on the face does not match the ambient lighting of the background room. David squinted at the screen, leaning closer. That is not a live video, I told him, the realization clicking into place with horrifying clarity. That is a deepfake. The audio is synthesized from a birthday video message I sent to my sister Brittany last month. I wore that exact same blouse and my hair was styled in that exact same way. David went completely pale. A deepfake, Madison, that is a severe allegation. Our system is designed to catch synthetic media. Your system failed, I replied sharply. Now give me the IP address from the electronic notary metadata log. He clicked back to the document properties, his hands visibly shaking now. He highlighted a string of numbers. I pulled out my phone, opened a network diagnostic tool I frequently used for my auditing investigations, and ran a trace on the IP address. The results populated on my screen in seconds. It was not a residential internet provider. It was a commercial fiber optic line. I read the registered business address out loud, my voice echoing in the small office. That IP address belongs to a commercial tech incubator space in the West Loop, I said, looking up at David. Specifically, the floor leased by a cryptocurrency startup. The startup founded by my brother-in-law, Jamal. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying precision. My parents did not have the technical capability to bypass banking security or generate a flawless deepfake, but Jamal did. Jamal was the epitome of a modern tech hustler. He wore designer sneakers with tailored suits, spoke entirely in buzzwords about blockchain disruption, and drove a leased sports car he could not afford. My sister Brittany worshipped the ground he walked on, treating his failing startup like the next Silicon Valley unicorn. They were the perfect marks for my parents' desperation. My parents had not just stepped in to manage my money out of some twisted sense of control. They had conspired with Jamal to forge federal documents, steal my identity, and drain my trust fund to save his sinking company. David was sweating profusely now. If what you are saying is true, this is a massive breach. I have to escalate this to our fraud department immediately. We need to freeze the destination accounts. No, I snapped, standing up from the chair. Do not freeze anything yet. If you freeze it now, they will claim it was a misunderstanding or a software glitch. They will hide behind my father's excuse that I am mentally unwell and simply confused about authorizing them. But Madison, the funds are already transferred. The funds are already gone, I interrupted, gathering my ID from his desk and sliding it back into my pocket. If I want to put them behind bars for federal wire fraud, I need them to spend that money. I need them to use my stolen funds across state lines to secure their commercial loans. I need them to dig their own graves so deep that no expensive defense attorney can ever pull them out. I turned toward the door, my mind already calculating the next 10 moves. I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to let Jamal boast about his new capital and let my parents bask in their stolen wealth. And then, I was going to systematically burn their entire world to ash. I walked out of the bank, got back into my car, and entered my parents' address into the GPS. It was time to go see what an $800,000 betrayal looked like in person. I pulled my car into the sweeping circular driveway of my parents' estate in the North Shore suburbs. The early morning sun was just beginning to cast long shadows across their perfectly manicured lawn. Parked right near the front entrance, blocking the walkway with absolute arrogance, was Jamal's flashy imported sports car. Next to it sat Brittany's luxury SUV. They were all here. The entire syndicate had gathered under one roof to celebrate their successful heist. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I still had my key, and I unlocked the heavy oak door, stepping into the grand foyer. The house was supposed to be quiet at this hour, but instead, the sharp, celebratory pop of a champagne cork echoed from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. When I turned the corner into the massive chef's kitchen, The scene before me made my blood run ice cold. Jamal was leaning against the marble island wearing a tailored designer suit with immaculate sneakers pouring vintage champagne into crystal flutes. Brittany was giggling, hanging onto his arm, her wrist heavy with new diamond bracelets. My father Richard stood near the stove looking relieved and smug, while my mother Patricia held her glass up for a toast. I cleared my throat. The sound sliced through their celebration like a blade. Four heads snapped in my direction. For a fraction of a second, I saw pure panic flash across my parents' faces. But Jamal, ever the smooth-talking tech founder, did not even flinch. He set the champagne bottle down and flashed me $1 million smile. "Madison," he said, spreading his arms wide as if welcoming me to a networking event. "You are up early. We were just talking about you. Come on in, grab a glass. We have some incredible news about your portfolio." "My portfolio," I repeated, stepping fully into the kitchen. "You mean the $800,000 you stole from my trust fund at 4 in the morning using a deep-fake video and a forged electronic notary?" The kitchen went dead silent. Brittany dropped her hand from Jamal's arm and took a step back. My father straightened his posture, instantly adopting his authoritative patriarch persona. "Now listen here, Madison," Richard said, pointing a stern finger at me. "Nobody stole anything. You have been incredibly stressed at work. You have been anxious, irrational, and completely uncommunicative. We had to step in and take temporary control of your finances before you did something reckless. Family protects family. I ignored my father and kept my eyes locked on my brother-in-law. You committed federal wire fraud, Jamal. You bypassed biometric banking security to use my cash as collateral for a commercial loan. Your cryptocurrency startup is bleeding money, and you needed a massive capital injection to keep the venture capitalists from tearing you apart." Jamal scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You accountants are all the same. No vision. I am not stealing your money, Maddie. I am unlocking your stagnant liquidity. That 800 grand was just sitting there doing nothing. I used it to secure a $3 million bridge loan for my company. When my next angel round closes in 6 months, I will release the collateral and return your money with a 20% yield. I am literally building generational wealth for this family, and you are over here crying about compliance rules." Brittany immediately chimed in, her voice shrill with that familiar victim complex she had perfected since childhood. "You are always so selfish, Madison. Jamal is trying to build an empire for us. He is creating a legacy. You just hoard your wealth while the rest of us stress about the future. You should be thanking him for cutting you in on the ground floor." I stared at my sister in absolute disbelief. "You are thanking a man who committed identity theft to save his own skin. When the bank audits that commercial loan, they will seize my cash, and your husband will go to federal prison. I am calling the police right now." I reached into my blazer pocket for my phone, but my mother's voice stopped me cold. "I would not do that if I were you, Madison." Patricia stepped forward, her heels tapping softly against the tile. She walked over to the far end of the kitchen island, picked up a thick manila folder, and slid it across the smooth marble. It stopped right in front of me. "Go ahead," she said, her lips curving into a chilling maternal smile. "Open it." I kept my eyes on her for a moment before looking down. I flipped open the cover of the folder. Inside was a dense stack of medical documents, psychological evaluations, and prescription records. They were from 3 years ago, during a period when I had worked myself into severe burnout and sought therapy for clinical depression and anxiety. But as I scanned the top summary page, my stomach dropped. The documents had been heavily altered. They included fabricated notes detailing erratic behavior, financial paranoia, and severe delusions. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "That is your psychiatric evaluation," Patricia said smoothly. "It clearly outlines a history of severe mental instability. If you make a scene, or if you try to contact the authorities regarding this completely legal power of attorney, your father and I will march straight into a family court. We will file for a full conservatorship." Richard stepped up beside her, crossing his arms. "The judge knows me, Madison. We play golf together. When he sees a successful, stable family stepping in to protect a deeply disturbed young woman from ruining her own life, he will grant us permanent guardianship. You will not even be allowed to own a credit card, let alone manage a trust fund. You would never get away with faking medical records, I said, though I felt the trap closing around me. We do not have to fake the fact that you were medicated, Brittany sneered. Everyone knows you went crazy 3 years ago. No one believes a hysterical woman, Madison. Especially not when a loving family is just trying to help her. I looked at the four of them. They had orchestrated a masterpiece of manipulation. Jamal provided the technological fraud, Richard provided the financial motive, and Patricia provided the psychological warfare. They had cornered me. If I went to the local police right now, my parents would immediately file the conservatorship paperwork, freezing my life entirely. A local detective would see a wealthy family dispute, look at the fake medical file, and tell us to handle it in civil court. I would be trapped in litigation for years, while Jamal burned through my life savings. I needed the commercial loan to clear. I needed Jamal to accept the $3 million across state lines. Once that happened, this would no longer be a local family dispute. It would become a federal crime governed by the FBI, and a local family court judge could not save them from a federal indictment. I closed the folder slowly, letting my shoulders slump. I forced the tension out of my jaw, manufacturing a look of total, crushing defeat. I looked at the floor, letting my silence stretch until the air in the kitchen grew heavy with their impending victory. "So that is it," I whispered, making my voice tremble just enough to sell the performance. "You take everything, and I just have to accept it." Patricia walked over and patted my shoulder, her touch making my skin crawl. "Be reasonable, darling. We will set up a monthly allowance for you. $2,000 a month should cover your basic expenses. Just focus on your job. Keep your head down and let Jamal handle the heavy lifting. You will thank us later." I did not look at her. I turned around and walked silently toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Jamal laugh, followed by the clinking of champagne glasses. They thought they had broken me. They thought their gaslighting had worked. I walked out to my car, got in, and locked the doors. The moment the engine started, my tears vanished. The facade of the broken daughter evaporated, replaced entirely by the cold, calculating mind of a forensic auditor. They wanted to play games with federal banking systems. They wanted to use my money to fund their fake empire. I pulled out of the driveway, my grip tight on the steering wheel. I was going to head straight back to my office, log into my encrypted terminal, and build a digital cage so tight they would never see the bars until the FBI knocked down their front door. The drive from the North Shore suburbs back to downtown Chicago took 45 minutes. I used every second of that commute to compartmentalize the betrayal. My parents and my sister had declared war. They assumed I was an easy target, a vulnerable woman they could manipulate with gaslighting and fake medical records. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I parked in my firm's secured underground garage, took the elevator up to the 32nd floor, and walked straight past the morning chatter of the junior analysts. I entered my glass-walled office, closed the blinds, locked the door behind me, and powered up my dedicated forensic workstation. My office was my sanctuary. Here there was no emotional manipulation, no fake family loyalty, and no psychological warfare. There were only numbers, and numbers never lie. I opened my encrypted auditing software, bypassed the standard public search gateways, and tapped directly into the financial databases I used for corporate fraud investigations. First, I needed to dissect Jamal. He projected the image of a tech visionary, but a quick search into his cryptocurrency startup NovaChain revealed a crumbling facade. NovaChain was registered as a Delaware LLC, but operated out of Chicago. By pulling his corporate credit reports and recent uniform commercial code filings, I found exactly what I was looking for. 2 days ago, Jamal had submitted an aggressive commercial loan application to a major federally insured bank. He was asking for a $3 million capital injection to save his company from imminent bankruptcy. Banks do not hand over $3 million to failing crypto startups without rock-solid guarantees. I scrolled down to the collateral section of his application. There it was, my trust fund. The $800,000 he had hijacked using the forged power of attorney was listed as the primary liquid asset securing the loan. Jamal had legally pledged my stolen money to the federal government. Next, I turned my attention to my father. Richard had always been a master of appearances, but maintaining a North Shore mansion requires serious liquid capital, something he clearly lacked. I ran a search on his property tax records. The results made me smirk. Richard was severely delinquent on his property taxes. He was 3 years behind, owing the county upwards of $150,000. Worse, I found multiple high-interest personal loans tied to his name, all of them in default. The mechanics of their syndicate became crystal clear. Richard and Patricia were drowning in debt and facing the very real threat of losing their mansion. Jamal was facing corporate ruin. They needed each other. Jamal possessed the technical skills to generate the deepfake and bypass the electronic notary, but he needed Richard and Patricia to act as the legal guardians to claim the money. The unspoken agreement was obvious. In exchange for handing over my trust fund as collateral, Jamal would use a portion of his newly acquired $3 million loan to secretly bail out my father and save the family estate. They thought they had committed the perfect victimless crime. They assumed I would be too terrified of a public mental health dispute to fight back, and that by the time I figured out how to unravel their mess, Jamal would have magically multiplied the money and made everyone whole. It was the classic delusion of every white-collar criminal I had ever investigated. But Jamal had made a fatal miscalculation. I opened a new digital dossier and began compiling the evidence. I saved the IP address logs from the forged electronic notary. I saved the metadata from the deepfake video. I downloaded Jamal's commercial loan application and the fraudulent power of attorney. By pulling off this heist, Jamal and my parents had not just stolen from a family member. They had used digital communication networks across state lines to execute a scheme to defraud a federally insured bank. In the eyes of the United States Department of Justice, this was no longer a local civil dispute over a trust fund. It was Title 18 United States Code Section 1343, wire fraud. And because they had used my biometric data and forged my signature to do it, they had tacked on aggravated identity theft. These were severe federal felonies. If convicted, Jamal and my parents were not looking at a slap on the wrist or a fine. They were looking at a mandatory minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, watching the progress bar as my computer encrypted the dossier onto a secure flash drive. My mother had threatened to ruin my life with a fake psychiatric hold. She had looked me in the eye and told me to accept my $2,000 monthly allowance like a good broken daughter. She wanted to play games with my freedom. I was going to strip away hers. I ejected the flash drive and slipped it into my blazer pocket. I picked up my office phone, bypassing my personal cell to ensure the call was secure. I dialed a direct line I knew by heart. It belonged to Special Agent Thomas, a veteran investigator in the FBI Financial Crimes Division here in Chicago. We had collaborated on several massive corporate embezzlement cases in the past, and he knew my forensic work was flawless. The line rang twice before his gruff voice answered. Thomas speaking. Agent Thomas, it is Madison. I kept my tone entirely professional, stripping away any hint of personal distress. I need a face-to-face meeting. Today. Madison, he replied, the surprise evident in his voice. I did not know your firm was working on anything currently under our jurisdiction. What do you have? I have a slam-dunk federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft case, I said, looking out my window at the Chicago skyline. Complete with digital footprints, interstate banking transfers, and deepfake forgery. The perpetrators are attempting to secure a fraudulent $3 million commercial loan from a federal bank. I have the entire network mapped out on a drive. Bring it in, Thomas said immediately. You know how much I love your spreadsheets. Who is the target? I paused for a fraction of a second, feeling the last remaining thread of familial loyalty snap and dissolve into nothing. The targets are the CEO of Nova Chain, Jamal and his accomplices, Richard and Patricia. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Thomas was sharp. He knew my last name. Madison. He started carefully. Are those your parents? They are perpetrators of federal fraud, I corrected him coldly. I will meet you at the usual diner near the Federal Plaza in 30 minutes. Come hungry, Thomas. I am handing you the easiest conviction of your career. I hung up the phone. The trap was meticulously constructed. Now I just had to convince the FBI to let my family walk right into it. I walked out of my office building and hailed a cab to the diner near the Federal Plaza. The trap was meticulously constructed. Now I just had to convince the FBI to let my family walk right into it. Special Agent Thomas was already sitting in a back booth when I arrived. He had a black coffee in front of him and his federal badge clipped to his belt. I slid into the vinyl seat across from him and placed the encrypted flash drive on the table. What am I looking at? Madison Thomas asked, picking up the drive. You are looking at a textbook case of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, I replied, keeping my voice low. The perpetrators are Richard and Patricia, along with my brother-in-law Jamal. They used a deepfake video and a forged electronic notary to bypass biometric security on my trust fund. They drained $800,000 overnight to use as collateral for a $3 million commercial loan to save Jamal's failing cryptocurrency startup. Thomas plugged the drive into his secure laptop. He spent the next 10 minutes scrolling through the IP logs, the metadata, and the interstate banking transfers I had compiled. His expression shifted from skeptical to grim. This is bulletproof, Thomas said, closing the laptop. We have enough to arrest them right now. I can freeze the accounts and have agents at their front door before noon. No, I said sharply. If you arrest them now, they will claim it was a family misunderstanding. My parents have already fabricated a psychiatric evaluation claiming I am mentally unstable. They will argue they were just managing my money for my own good, and Jamal will claim the commercial loan application was a preliminary draft. They will hire expensive defense attorneys and drag this out in civil court for years. Thomas narrowed his eyes. What do you suggest? Let the bank disperse the $3 million loan, I said. Let Jamal accept federal funds based on fraudulent collateral. Once that money crosses state lines and lands in his corporate account, the crime is irreversible. It elevates the charges, and they will have absolutely no defense. Thomas tapped his fingers against the table. I can monitor the loan disbursement, but if we let this play out, I need definitive recorded proof of their criminal intent. I need them admitting that they stole your identity for the commercial loan, bypassing any excuse about managing your mental health. I can get that for you, I said without hesitation. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek audio recording device. He slid it across the table. It was no larger than a key fob. Wear this, Thomas instructed. Get them talking. Get Jamal to admit exactly what he did with the money. Once we have the audio, we wait for the loan to clear. Then we drop the hammer. I slipped the device into my blazer pocket. Consider it done. I left the diner and retrieved my car. I drove straight back to the North Shore suburbs. The morning sun was fully up now, illuminating my parents' sprawling estate. Jamal's imported sports car was still parked arrogantly in the circular driveway. I clipped the recording device to the inside collar of my blazer, ensuring the microphone was unobstructed, and tapped the button to begin recording. I marched up the front steps and did not bother with the doorbell. I raised my foot and kicked the heavy oak door open. The door slammed against the interior wall with a deafening crash echoing through the grand foyer. I strode directly into the living room. The scene was exactly as entitled as I expected. Richard, Patricia, Brittany, and Jamal were lounging on the custom leather sofas, popping a fresh bottle of champagne. The sudden crash of the front door made them all jump. Patricia spilled her drink on the Persian rug, and Richard leaped to his feet. Madison! Richard shouted. What on earth is wrong with you? I ignored my father and locked my eyes entirely on Jamal. You thought I would just roll over? I said, my voice projecting clearly for the hidden microphone. You stole my identity to secure a commercial loan for your bankrupt company. Jamal let out a loud, arrogant laugh. He set his champagne flute down on the glass coffee table and adjusted his designer suit jacket. He took the bait instantly, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. I did not steal anything, Matty Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension as he began to monologue. I used your $800,000 as collateral for a massive commercial loan to save my startup. Your money was just sitting in a trust fund, doing absolutely nothing. I am putting it to work. I secured $3 million in federal funding today. As a tech visionary, I know how to leverage stagnant liquidity. I am going to triple your money in 6 months. You should be down on your knees thanking me for making you an investor. I kept my face perfectly stoic, ensuring the wire captured every single syllable of his confession. So you admit you forged my signature to leverage my trust fund for your corporate debt, I stated clearly. Brittany slammed her glass down and stood up, playing her favorite role of the victim. You are always so selfish with your wealth. Madison, she whined, crossing her arms defensively. You sit in your apartment hoarding your trust fund while Jamal is actually trying to build a legacy for this family. He is innovating. He is creating an empire. You are just trying to ruin his success because you are jealous. You are all delusional, I said, making sure my voice carried the exact tone of a woman pushed to her absolute limit. You committed wire fraud. You forged federal documents. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone, holding it up for all of them to see. I am done playing your games, I announced, staring directly at Jamal. I am calling the police right here, right now, in the middle of this living room. I am going to report the theft of my identity, and I am going to watch them march you out of this mansion in handcuffs. My thumb hovered over the keypad of my phone, ready to dial emergency services. I wanted to see the panic in their eyes. I wanted to watch their smug expressions shatter as the reality of a police interrogation set in. But the panic never came. Instead of lunging for my phone or begging for mercy, my mother simply sighed. It was a long, theatrical sigh of a woman dealing with an unruly toddler. Patricia set her champagne flute down on the glass coffee table with a delicate clink. She walked over to the marble kitchen island, her heels echoing sharply in the cavernous room. From the top drawer, she pulled out a thick, cream-colored manila folder. She placed her manicured hand on top of it and slid it across the smooth stone surface until it stopped inches from where I stood. Go ahead, Patricia said, her lips curving into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Open it. Read it before you make a call that will ruin the rest of your life. I kept my phone in my left hand but reached out with my right to flip open the cover. The heading at the top of the first page was printed in a bold clinical font. It read, Comprehensive Psychiatric Evaluation. The patient name listed was mine. The date was recent. The evaluating physician was a name I did not recognize, likely a hired gun or a fabricated entity cooked up by Richard's expensive legal connections. I scanned the paragraphs. The document was a masterpiece of fiction woven around a tiny kernel of truth. 3 years ago, I had worked myself into a state of severe burnout. I took a brief leave of absence and spoke to a therapist about managing stress and mild depression. It was a responsible professional way to handle career exhaustion. But the pages in front of me painted a drastically different picture. The fabricated file detailed paranoid delusions, erratic financial behavior, and severe episodes of dissociation. It claimed I had a history of making false accusations against my family members due to a paranoid personality disorder. What is this garbage? I demanded, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach. My father stepped up beside my mother, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked down at me with the authoritative arrogance of a man who believed his wealth made him untouchable. It is a legally binding medical opinion, Madison Richards stated. If you dial that phone and bring the police into this house, your mother and I will immediately file an emergency petition in family court. We will submit that evaluation and ask for a full permanent conservatorship. Jamal leaned against the counter, smirking as he adjusted his designer watch. They will declare you legally incompetent, Maddie. You will not be allowed to manage a checking account, let alone conduct a corporate audit. Your career will be over by lunchtime. Brittany nodded eagerly, pouring herself another glass of champagne. You are clearly not well, Madison. You are hallucinating that Jamal is stealing from you just because he is a successful tech founder, and you are jealous. A judge will see right through your lies. Patricia stepped closer, stepping into my personal space until I could smell her expensive floral perfume. Her voice dropped to a harsh, venomous whisper. The judge who handles these cases plays golf with your father every Sunday. He knows us as a respectable, loving family trying to protect our deeply troubled daughter. If you try to accuse Jamal of fraud, We will testify under oath that your illness has caused a complete break from reality. We will say we transferred the trust fund to protect it from your manic spending sprees." Patricia reached out and tapped the fabricated medical folder with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "No one believes a crazy woman, Madison. Take your $2,000 monthly allowance and go home." My mind raced. The audio recorder pinned inside my blazer was capturing every single word. I had Jamal admitting to the wire fraud. I had Patricia and Richard actively blackmailing me and admitting their willingness to submit fraudulent medical records to a judge. The evidence was pure gold. But my forensic instincts warned me to pause. If I pushed them too far right now, they might panic and halt the commercial loan disbursement. I needed that $3 million federal loan to hit Jamal's corporate account. The transfer across state lines was the final puzzle piece required by the FBI to lock them away for 2 decades. A local police officer arriving right now would ruin the federal trap. The local cops would look at this fake medical file, look at my wealthy, well-dressed parents, and tell us it was a civil family dispute. I would be dragged into a messy legal battle over my own sanity fighting a biased local judge, while Jamal quietly liquidated my funds. I needed to play the long game. I let my hand shake. It was a subtle movement, but enough for them to notice. I slowly lowered my phone, letting the screen go black. I stared at the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, forcing my shoulders to slump. I let the fight drain out of my posture entirely, manufacturing a look of total, crushing despair. I knew how to read a room, and I knew exactly what kind of submission they demanded to see. "You would really do this?" I whispered, making my voice crack perfectly. "You would lock me in a conservatorship and destroy my career over Jamal's failing company." "We are protecting the family legacy," Richard replied coldly, showing absolutely zero remorse. "You can either be a part of it, or you can be a ward of the state. The choice is yours." I looked at the floor, letting the silence stretch. I needed them to feel the absolute high of victory. I needed them to believe their gaslighting had broken my spirit entirely. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the marble island. "Just send the allowance to my checking account." I turned around slowly. I did not look back as I walked out of the kitchen. Their mocking laughter and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes followed me down the long hallway. I stepped out, the front door, walked down the sweeping driveway past Jamal's obnoxious sports car, and got into my vehicle. As I closed the car door, the facade of the broken daughter completely vanished. I reached inside my blazer and turned off the recording device. The tape was secure. I had everything I needed. They had swallowed the bait whole, assuming their wealth and manipulation made them invincible. Now it was time to let them hang themselves. I pulled out of the neighborhood and drove back to downtown Chicago. The morning commute was heavy with traffic, but my mind was entirely insulated from the noise of the city. I did not shed a single tear on the drive home. The moment my car crossed the city limits, the fabricated persona of the defeated daughter melted away completely. I parked in my secure garage, took the elevator up to my apartment, and locked the deadbolt behind me. I tossed my keys onto the entryway table and walked straight to my home office. My apartment was minimalist by design, but my office was a fortress of processing power. I booted up my custom-built workstation. 3 curved monitors hummed to life, casting a stark blue glow across the dark room. I reached into my blazer, unclipped the audio recorder Thomas had given me, and connected it to a secure port. I extracted the raw audio file, encrypted it, and backed it up to 3 separate offshore servers. The confession was safe. Now I needed the digital paper trail to build an inescapable cage. I launched my forensic auditing suite. It was a proprietary software used by elite financial investigators to map asset flows, cross-reference public records, and bypass standard institutional firewalls to access raw filing data. I cracked my knuckles and began typing. First on the chopping block was Jamal and his so-called tech empire. I entered the tax identification number for his cryptocurrency startup NovaChain. The software chewed through corporate registries, state tax boards, and uniform commercial code filings. The results populated on my screen in seconds. Novachain was a hollow shell. Jamal had burned through his initial venture capital funding in less than 8 months. He was leasing expensive office space and driving luxury cars while his payroll accounts were bouncing. But the most damning document was the commercial loan application he had submitted to a federal bank based in New York. I pulled the raw data file. Jamal was seeking a $3 million capital injection. The application required liquid collateral, and there it was listed in stark black and white. My trust fund. $800,000 pledged as a guarantee backed by the forged power of attorney. But Jamal could not have executed this alone. He needed my parents to act as the authorized signatories. I opened a new search window and typed in my father's social security number. Richard had always projected the image of untouchable wealth, lecturing me on financial responsibility while sneering at my career. It was time to look under the hood of his pristine reputation. I queried the county assessor database and pulled the property tax records for their North Shore mansion. The screen flooded with red delinquency notices. Richard was drowning. He had defaulted on his property taxes for 3 consecutive years. The county was preparing to issue a tax lien sale within the next 60 days. I dug deeper, running a shadow credit pull. My father had secretly taken out multiple high-risk personal loans, leveraging his equity until there was absolutely nothing left. The mansion was effectively worthless to him, a ticking time bomb of foreclosure. Next, I ran a search on the medical clinic listed on the fake psychiatric evaluation my mother had threatened me with. A quick cross-reference with the state medical board revealed the evaluating physician had his license suspended 2 years ago for writing fraudulent prescriptions. My mother had literally purchased a fake psychological profile from a disgraced doctor to use as a weapon against her own daughter. The sheer malice of it was breathtaking. The pieces of the syndicate snapped together in a perfect, sickening picture. Jamal needed collateral to save his failing startup. Richard and Patricia needed a massive cash bailout to save their estate from being auctioned off by the county. They struck a desperate parasitic deal. Jamal would forge the digital notary and use the deepfake to steal my trust fund. My parents would sign the fraudulent power of attorney, acting as the legitimate guardians managing my money due to my fabricated mental instability. Once Jamal secured the $3 million commercial loan using my cash as collateral, he would funnel a portion of those federal funds back to my father to pay off the tax liens. They were cannibalizing my future to sustain their illusions of grandeur. I leaned closer to the monitors, my eyes scanning the granular details of Jamal's loan agreement. I needed the exact mechanism of the transfer. If this remained a local transaction within Illinois state lines, a slick defense attorney might argue it down to a civil dispute or simple misappropriation. I needed federal jurisdiction. I needed a crime so severe it bypassed state courts entirely. I needed to ensure that the corrupt family court judge my parents golfed with could not protect them. I opened the bank routing directory and traced the disbursement schedule for Jamal's pending loan. My pulse quickened as the routing numbers aligned on my screen. The lending institution evaluating Jamal's application was headquartered in Manhattan. To fund Jamal's corporate account in Chicago, the bank was initiating an automated clearinghouse transfer through a Federal Reserve gateway. The money was scheduled to cross state lines tomorrow morning at precisely 9 o'clock. I smiled, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The moment that digital transfer initiated navigating across state lines via telecommunication networks, the crime mutated. It was no longer just identity theft or state-level fraud. It became a direct violation of federal law. Wire fraud. A felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence that no country club judge could dismiss. I had the IP logs, the forged notary stamp, the deepfake metadata, the audio confession, and now the exact federal wire routing numbers. The matrix of their destruction was complete. I began dragging and dropping files into a master directory on my secure server. I named the folder Project Icarus. First went the biometric verification video. I attached my forensic analysis highlighting the rendering glitch along the jawline and cross-referencing the audio frequencies with the birthday message I had sent Brittany weeks ago. The software mapped the deepfake, perfectly proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the video was a synthetic fabrication. Next came the electronic notary log. I matched the commercial fiber optic IP address directly to the commercial lease agreement for Nova Chain. Jamal had not even bothered to mask his network via a virtual private network. He executed the fraud directly from his own office. He was arrogant, and arrogance leaves the brightest, most undeniable digital footprints. I pulled the Know Your Customer compliance forms Jamal had submitted to the Manhattan Bank. To secure a commercial loan of $3 million, the bank required verified identification for all collateral holders. Jamal had uploaded high-resolution scans of my driver license and my passport. He had forged my signature on the federal tax forms. He even submitted a fake utility bill to verify my address, modifying the PDF metadata with cheap, easily detectable editing software. It was absolute amateur hour. As a forensic accountant, I regularly dismantled complex offshore shell companies designed by cartels and corrupt billionaires. Jamal was a toddler playing in a sandbox, completely unaware of the bulldozer hovering over his head. I meticulously mapped the financial flow. I created a flowchart demonstrating how my stolen $800,000 was currently sitting in a holding account at the Federal Bank in Manhattan, acting as the sole collateral for the loan disbursement. I pulled the exact routing numbers for the automated clearinghouse transfer scheduled for the next morning. Then I added the property tax delinquency notices for my parents' North Shore mansion, providing the undeniable motive. They were not managing my mental health. They were executing a coordinated financial bailout to save themselves from absolute ruin. Any standard attorney would advise me to take this evidence, file a civil injunction, freeze the accounts, and drag my family before a local judge. I knew exactly how that would play out. My father would walk into the courtroom wearing his best tailored suit. My mother would cry on cue, clutching that fabricated psychological evaluation written by her disgraced doctor. They would paint me as a deeply disturbed woman having a severe manic episode. The judge, who likely attended the same charity galas as my parents, would issue a temporary stay. Jamal would quietly funnel the money into untraceable offshore crypto wallets, while the civil litigation dragged on for 5 long years. I would bleed out in legal fees while they lived comfortably in their mansion. Civil court was designed to make lawyers rich and keep wealthy families comfortable. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a prolonged battle. I refused to let them sleep in their expensive beds while I fought to reclaim my own money. Federal criminal court is an entirely different beast. The United States Department of Justice does not care about local country club connections or fake medical files. When you use telecommunications to cross state lines for the purpose of executing a fraudulent scheme, it triggers the federal wire fraud statute. Every single email Jamal sent to the Manhattan Bank, every digital signature my parents uploaded, and the incoming $3 million wire transfer itself constituted separate counts of federal wire fraud. Add the unauthorized use of my biometric data, and we trigger aggravated identity theft. That specific charge carries a mandatory consecutive 2-year prison sentence on top of the wire fraud penalties. There is no parole in the federal system. They were going to serve hard time. The federal system boasts a massive conviction rate. When the FBI swoops in, they do not negotiate. They freeze every single asset. They seize properties. They destroy lives with absolute bureaucratic efficiency. I encrypted the master directory folder with military-grade security protocols. I copied the entire package onto a sterile, untraceable flash drive. I then spent the next hour meticulously scrubbing my own access logs from the state and federal databases. Jamal considered himself a tech genius, but he lacked the fundamental paranoia required to survive in my world. He would never know I had breached his network until the federal agents kicked his office doors off the hinges. I picked up the silver flash drive, feeling its cold weight in my palm. This tiny piece of metal contained the absolute destruction of my entire family tree. My parents would lose their mansion, their reputation, and their freedom. Jamal would lose his startup and face decades behind bars. Brittany would be left penniless, her golden child status rendered utterly worthless when her husband went to federal prison. I felt absolutely no guilt. They had chosen to view me as prey. I was simply proving that I was the apex predator. The sun was fully up now, casting bright morning light across my apartment. I had everything I needed to burn their empire to the ground. I opened a secure encrypted voice over Internet Protocol application on my secondary phone. This line could not be traced, recorded, or intercepted. I dialed a direct extension I had memorized years ago during a massive corporate embezzlement investigation. It was a direct line to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division in Chicago. The line clicked open after 2 rings. A familiar gruff voice answered. I took a deep breath, ready to hand over my own blood relatives to the federal government. Thomas, speaking the gruff voice, barked through the encrypted line. Agent Thomas, it is Madison. I said, my voice completely devoid of the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I need a sit down, off the books, highly sensitive. There was a brief pause. Thomas and I had dismantled 3 corporate embezzlement rings together. He knew I never called unless I had a bulletproof case. The South Loop Diner, he replied. 30 minutes. I terminated the connection, grabbed my coat, and headed out into the crisp Chicago morning. The South Loop Diner was a relic of the past, characterized by sticky vinyl booths, the smell of burnt coffee, and an absolute lack of surveillance cameras. It was the perfect place to hand over a digital guillotine. When I walked through the glass doors, Thomas was already sitting in a back booth facing the entrance. He wore a rumpled gray suit that screamed government employee. A mug of black coffee sat untouched in front of him. I slid into the booth opposite him and placed the encrypted silver flash drive flat on the scratched Formica table. What am I looking at? Madison Thomas asked, his eyes dropping to the drive. You are looking at a textbook execution of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud, I told him, keeping my voice low enough to blend with the diner noise. The primary target is a cryptocurrency startup called Nova Chain, run by a man named Jamal. His co-conspirators are Richard and Patricia. Thomas frowned, his brow furrowing, as his investigative brain connected the dots. Richard and Patricia. Madison. Those are your parents. They are criminals who used deep-fake technology and forged electronic notary seals to drain my $800,000 trust fund. I corrected him, my tone clinical. They are using my stolen money as liquid collateral to secure a $3 million commercial loan from a federally insured bank in Manhattan. Jamal is using the capital to artificially inflate his failing startup, and in exchange, he is funneling a portion of that loan back to my father to pay off a massive county tax lien. The entire digital trail is on that drive. IP addresses, deepfake metadata, forged compliance forms, and the exact automated clearinghouse routing numbers. Thomas reached out and picked up the flash drive. He pulled a secure, heavily encrypted government tablet from his briefcase, plugged the drive in, and entered his credentials. For the next 10 minutes, the only sound between us was the clattering of silverware from the kitchen and the soft hum of the diner. I watched his eyes track across the screen, digesting the forensic spreadsheets, the timeline of the deepfake creation, and the pending loan application. When he finally looked up, his expression was completely hardened. This is flawless, Madison. You have handed me a fully wrapped federal indictment. He reached for his phone. I am calling the United States Attorney right now. We are going to freeze the Manhattan bank accounts, intercept the collateral transfer, and have agents at their front door before noon. I reached across the table and clamped my hand down over his wrist. No, I said sharply. Do not freeze anything. Thomas stared at me, genuinely confused. Madison, they have your money. If I do not freeze the Manhattan holding account immediately, that $3 million commercial loan is going to be dispersed. That is exactly what I want, I replied, releasing his wrist and leaning back in the booth. If you freeze the accounts right now, they will claim it was a misunderstanding. My parents have already fabricated a psychiatric evaluation claiming I am experiencing severe mental instability. They will argue in a local civil court that they were simply trying to protect my assets from my own manic spending. Jamal will claim the commercial loan application was just a preliminary draft and blame the forged signatures on a rogue employee or a software glitch. They will hire expensive defense attorneys and tie this up in civil litigation for the next 5 years. Thomas narrowed his eyes, understanding the legal maneuvering I was anticipating. What do you suggest? Let the bank disperse the $3 million, I said, my voice steady and absolute. Let Jamal accept federal funds based on fraudulent collateral. Let him sign the final closing documents and physically receive that money into his corporate account. Once that automated clearinghouse transfer crosses state lines and lands in Chicago, the crime is irreversible. It is no longer attempted fraud. It is a completed, undeniable federal felony. Thomas tapped his fingers against the table, his law enforcement instincts warring with my strategic patience. Madison letting a fraudulent $3 million loan disperse is an enormous risk. If Jamal funnels that money into decentralized cryptocurrency wallets before we can seize it, it will vanish. The bank takes a massive hit, and I have to explain to the director why I let a cybercriminal launder federal funds. He will not funnel it to crypto right away, I countered smoothly. He is arrogant, and he is desperate for validation. He wants to use that money to throw a massive anniversary gala for his startup. He wants to parade around the Chicago elite, pretending he secured a legitimate angel investment round. Furthermore, he has to wire a massive chunk of that money to my father to pay off the property tax liens, otherwise my parents lose their mansion to the county. Every single transaction they make with that dispersed loan adds another count of money laundering to their indictment. I leaned closer, holding his gaze. The bank is federally insured, Thomas. They will be made whole, and my trust fund will be restored by the fraud protection guarantees. You have the IP logs. You have the forged signatures. You have everything you need to secure a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence without the possibility of parole. You just have to let them dig their own graves deep enough that they can never climb out. Thomas was silent for a long moment. He looked down at the encrypted tablet, reviewing the irrefutable evidence I had compiled. He knew my track record. He knew I did not gamble with numbers. Fine, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. I will monitor the loan disbursement. We let the $3 million clear. But if we are playing the long game, I need you to understand your role in this. The moment that money hits Jamal's account, your family is going to feel invincible. They are going to spend lavishly. They are going to taunt you. You cannot react. You cannot show them any anger or give them any reason to suspect you are working with the federal government. I can handle it, I assured him. You have to play the part perfectly, Madison Thomas warned, packing his tablet away. You have to go back there and act like a defeated, broken woman. You have to let them believe their gaslighting worked. If they smell a trap, Jamal will panic and try to move the funds offshore. You must maintain absolute compliance. I nodded slowly, a cold sense of purpose settling over my entire body. Consider it done. I slid out of the booth and walked out of the diner into the bright Chicago sunlight. The federal trap was officially armed and waiting. All that was left for me to do was to step back into the lion's den, lower my head, and play the role of the tragic, submissive daughter, while my family gleefully danced toward their own absolute destruction. I walked back to my apartment with a singular mission to become a ghost in my own life. For the next 3 weeks, I perfected the art of absolute submission. I answered my mother's condescending phone calls with quiet, monosyllabic responses. I allowed the $2,000 monthly allowance to hit my checking account without a single word of protest. Every time my father texted me to remind me to take my supposed medication, I simply replied that I was following his advice. I swallowed my pride and let them believe they had successfully crushed my spirit. But behind the closed blinds of my home office, I was watching their every move. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 21 days after my covert meeting with Agent Thomas, my encrypted tracking software chimed. The automated clearinghouse transfer had successfully crossed state lines. The Manhattan Bank had released the $3 million commercial loan directly into Jamal's corporate account at NovaChain. The trap had officially snapped shut. The moment the federal funds cleared, the syndicate wasted absolutely no time. They did not attempt to hide the money or funnel it through shell companies to obscure the trail. Their arrogance was so profound that they simply began spending it with reckless abandon. Through my shadow monitoring tools and their own incessant need to boast on social media, I had a front row seat to their financial hemorrhage. It was like watching a slow motion car crash orchestrated by greedy toddlers. My parents were the first to move. I watched the county tax database update in real time. A wire transfer of $150,000 cleared Richard's delinquent property tax liens. But saving the mansion was apparently not enough to satisfy their ravenous appetite for status. 2 days later, a massive withdrawal flagged on the corporate account. I traced the routing number to a luxury real estate development group in downtown Chicago. Richard and Patricia had just put a non-refundable down payment on a sprawling penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. They were essentially using stolen federal loan money to upgrade their lifestyle, treating Jamal's corporate account like their personal piggy bank. My mother immediately began posting fabric swatches and marble countertops on her social media pages, boasting to her country club friends about her exciting new interior design project. Jamal was equally careless. A legitimate tech founder would have used a $3 million capital injection to hire software engineers, clear outstanding vendor debts, or expand server capacity. Jamal used it to inflate his massive ego. I tracked a massive wire transfer to a luxury car dealership, followed immediately by an invoice from an elite public relations firm. He was buying press coverage to mask the absolute emptiness of his company. He paid for sponsored articles in minor tech blogs, branding himself as a disruptive genius who had just closed a highly competitive funding round. I read his self-congratulatory posts with a mixture of disgust and cold clinical amusement. Every dollar he spent on vanity was another heavy link in the chain connecting him to the wire fraud. I sat in my dark office drinking black coffee, meticulously logging every single transaction into a shadow ledger for Agent Thomas. I was documenting the exact routing numbers, the vendor receipts, and the specific assets they were purchasing with stolen federal funds. I knew how the Department of Justice operated. By allowing them to buy these tangible assets with dirty money, I was guaranteeing that the federal government would seize all of it through civil asset forfeiture the moment the indictments dropped. But it was my sister Brittany who truly embraced the illusion of limitless wealth. She had always treated money as a weapon to measure her superiority over me. Now that she believed she had legally conquered my trust fund, her spending became absolutely feverish. She maxed out designer boutiques on Michigan Avenue, leaving a digital trail of receipts from high-end fashion houses and exclusive jewelry stores. Enduring their sheer audacity was suffocating. There were moments when the injustice of it all threatened to break my carefully maintained composure. I watched the people who had gaslit me, threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward, and stolen my future parading around the city as if they were royalty. I had to force myself to remember that this temporary humiliation was the heavy price of their permanent destruction. The federal government was watching them spend every single dime compiling a forfeiture list that would leave them entirely destitute. Late on a Friday afternoon, my phone vibrated on my desk. I broke my gaze away from a spreadsheet tracking Jamal's fraudulent corporate expenditures and glanced at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Brittany. I opened the message to find a high-resolution photograph of my sister standing proudly in front of an exotic car dealership. She was holding up the keys to a brand-new custom matte black Mercedes G-Wagon. She wore oversized designer sunglasses and a smug, victorious smile. The vehicle cost well over $200,000, paid for in cash from her husband's fraudulently funded corporate account. Below the photograph was a caption dripping with venomous triumph. "See, Jamal knows how to make money work. Do not be bitter." I stared at the photograph of my sister leaning against the matte black Mercedes. The sheer audacity of her message practically vibrated off the screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have sent her a screenshot of the federal penal code for money laundering. I could have told her that the shiny new vehicle she was posing with was legally the property of the United States government and would soon be impounded by the FBI. I could have destroyed her smug sense of superiority with a single sentence. Instead, I forced my breathing to slow. I channeled every ounce of my forensic discipline, locked away my anger, and typed exactly 2 words. "Enjoy it." I hit send and immediately tossed the phone onto my desk. That brief, compliant response was everything she wanted. It was the white flag of a defeated older sister. In her mind, she had won. In reality, she had just provided me with time-stamped photographic evidence of possessing assets purchased with proceeds from federal wire fraud. The psychological warfare did not stop with Brittany. By the end of the week, Jamal decided it was time to take his victory lap on a much larger stage. I opened my laptop one morning to find my professional network buzzing. Jamal had posted a massive update on LinkedIn and it was going viral. He attached a highly edited professional headshot of himself standing in his empty leased office looking thoughtfully out the window. The caption was a masterclass in narcissistic fiction. He wrote a sprawling essay about the grueling journey of a tech founder overcoming adversity and the power of visionary leadership. He officially announced that Nova Chain had closed a triumphant angel investment round, securing $3 million in capital. He attributed his success to endless hustle, sleepless nights, and the unwavering support of his amazing family who believed in his vision when no one else did. The post racked up thousands of likes and hundreds of comments within hours. The worst part was watching my own mutual acquaintances engage with it. Former college classmates, distant relatives, and even a few junior analysts from my own financial firm began messaging me. They sent links to Jamal's post with congratulatory notes praising my family's incredible success. They told me how lucky I was to have such a supportive, wealthy family, and how inspiring it was to see Jamal breaking barriers in the tech space. Every notification felt like a fresh layer of humiliation. I had to bite my tongue until I tasted blood. I forced myself to send polite, non-committal responses, thanking them for their kind words while swallowing the bile rising in my throat. They were cheering for a man who had stolen my identity and mortgaged my future. It was a suffocating social performance smiling through the public praise of my own executioners. But the social humiliation was merely surface noise. I retreated back into the cold, comforting silence of my shadow ledger. While Jamal was busy replying to comments from gullible tech investors and wannabe entrepreneurs, I was tracking the exact movement of his stolen capital. He was not just spending the money. He was systematically layering it, moving funds between various corporate accounts in a clumsy attempt to disguise the origin of the expenditures. He thought he was being clever by paying for his luxury public relations firm through a secondary vendor account. He thought the federal government would not notice if he categorized the down payment on my parents' penthouse as a corporate real estate investment. He was dead wrong. Every time he transferred those funds, he triggered another count of money laundering. The initial crime of wire fraud was carrying a 20-year sentence, but these subsequent financial maneuvers were compounding their exposure exponentially. He was transforming a single federal indictment into a multi-count racketeering case. I compiled the vendor receipts for Brittany's Mercedes, the routing numbers for the penthouse escrow account, and the invoices for Jamal's media blitz. I mapped the flow of cash from the New York bank directly to the luxury car dealership and the downtown real estate brokers. I sent daily encrypted data dumps to Agent Thomas. My FBI contact remained silent, absorbing the massive influx of evidence, letting the syndicate weave their own noose. We were letting them build a financial house of cards so tall that the collapse would be catastrophic. The days bled into weeks characterized by this agonizing duality. To the outside world, my family was ascending to the absolute pinnacle of Chicago high society. They were dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, posting photos from exclusive VIP lounges, and soaking up the admiration of their peers. My father updated his professional profiles to reflect his new status as an elite investor. My mother flooded her social media with pictures of designer furniture mock-ups for her new penthouse. To me, they were inmates on borrowed time dancing blindly toward the edge of a cliff. I maintained my absolute silence, never deviating from the role of the broken, irrelevant daughter. I went to work, analyzed legitimate corporate fraud cases by day, and meticulously dismantled my own family by night. Then, on a crisp Thursday afternoon, the final act of their delusion arrived directly at my doorstep. I took the elevator down to the lobby of my apartment building to check my mail. Intermixed with the usual utility bills and grocery store flyers was a thick, heavy envelope. It was not a standard letter. The envelope was crafted from premium high-gloss cardstock pitch black and sealed with a custom gold wax stamp bearing the Nova Chain Company logo. I ran my fingers over the expensive textured paper, feeling a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline. I did not need to open it to know what they had done. Their arrogance had grown so massive that they could no longer contain it within digital posts and text messages. They needed a live audience to witness their triumph. I slid my finger under the gold wax seal, breaking the Nova Chain emblem in half. Inside was a heavy acrylic invitation card etched with metallic gold lettering. Jamal was sparing no expense to celebrate his own ego. The card announced the 5th anniversary gala for his cryptocurrency startup to be held at the Grand Ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel, one of the most exclusive and expensive venues in all of Chicago. The date was set for this upcoming Saturday evening, but it was the smaller card tucked behind the main invitation that made my blood run cold with quiet fury. It was a VIP access pass. Printed right at the top in elegant calligraphy was my name, followed by the title Guest of Honor. At the bottom, someone had scribbled a handwritten note in my mother's unmistakable looping cursive. "Madison, we insist you come. It is time you see what real success looks like. Wear something nice. We bought a table right by the stage so you can have the best view. Love, Mom." The psychological cruelty of the gesture was absolute perfection. They were not inviting me to make amends or to bridge the gap they had created by stealing my trust fund. They were inviting me as a prop. I was meant to serve as a visual testament to their dominance. They wanted me sitting in the front row, wearing my inexpensive clothes, staring up at Jamal as he basked in the adoration of the Chicago elite investors. They wanted to parade their stolen wealth right in front of my face, confident that their fabricated psychiatric evaluation would keep me entirely silent. They wanted me to eat their expensive catered food paid for by my own stolen money and swallow my pride while they played the roles of benevolent wealthy family members taking pity on their troubled daughter. I set the acrylic invitation down on my kitchen counter. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. They wanted a show. I was going to give them a spectacle. I pulled out my secure secondary phone and opened the encrypted messaging application I used to communicate with Agent Thomas. I typed out a quick, precise message. "Jamal is hosting a 5-year anniversary gala for NovaChain this Saturday at the Grand Ballroom. The entire syndicate will be present. He will be courting new investors using my stolen funds as proof of capital. It is the perfect bottleneck." We dropped the net Saturday night. I watched the screen as the delivery checkmark appeared. Less than a minute later, the typing indicator bubbled up. Thomas replied, "A public takedown is messy, Madison. Are you sure you want to do this in front of hundreds of people? We can pick them up quietly at their homes on Monday morning." I did not hesitate. I typed my response with absolute certainty. I want them exposed in front of the exact people they are trying to impress. They stole federal funds to buy social status. We are going to strip that status away on a stage they paid for. Secure the warrants. Thomas replied simply, "Warrants will be signed by Friday afternoon. I will have tactical teams staging at the hotel perimeters by 7. Send me the floor plan and secure the audiovisual booth. Do not engage until my teams are in position." The trap was no longer just set. It was primed for absolute devastation. Now I needed to look the part. For the past decade, my wardrobe had consisted entirely of forensic accountant armor, navy blue blazers, slate gray pencil skirts, and sensible black pumps. My aesthetic was designed to make me blend into the background of corporate boardrooms so I could quietly dismantle financial irregularities. I was the ghost in the machine. But this Saturday, I was not going into that ballroom to be a ghost. I was going in to be the main event. I grabbed my purse and took a cab to the Magnificent Mile, bypassing the practical department stores and heading straight for the high-end designer boutiques. I walked into an exclusive atelier and bypassed the racks of safe, understated evening wear. I knew exactly what I was looking for. I found it draped over a mannequin in the center of the showroom. It was a floor-length evening gown, crafted from heavy, luxurious silk. It featured a sharp, asymmetrical neckline, a daring thigh-high slit, and a silhouette designed to command absolute attention. But the most striking element was the color. It was not a safe black or a subdued navy. It was a brilliant, unapologetic blood red. I purchased the dress immediately, adding a pair of towering stilettos that would put me at eye level with my father. I bought bold, aggressive jewelry that caught the light like shattered glass. I was spending my own legitimately earned money, and every swipe of my card felt like sharpening a blade. This was not a shopping trip. It was the procurement of battle armor. When I returned to my apartment, I hung the crimson gown on the back of my bedroom door. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, imagining the look on my mother's face when I walked into the hotel wearing a color that demanded the entire room stop and stare. She had told me to wear something nice. She expected me to arrive looking like a victim crushed under the weight of their gaslighting and theft. She expected me to shrink into my seat and watch them shine. I reached out and touched the cool silk of the dress. The era of the compliant daughter was officially dead. I was not going to that gala to hide in the shadows of their stolen empire. I was walking into that ballroom as the executioner. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp electric chill of an impending storm. I did not sleep the night before. Instead, I spent the twilight hours running final diagnostic checks on the encrypted presentation I had built to dismantle my family. I had to ensure that every pixel of evidence was formatted to display flawlessly on a massive high-definition screen. By noon, my digital guillotine was perfectly sharpened. Now I just needed to rig the execution block. Around 2 in the afternoon hours before the first guests were scheduled to arrive in their tuxedos and gowns, I walked into the Peninsula Hotel, wearing a simple beige trench coat and carrying a large leather tote bag. The grand ballroom was buzzing with catering staff, lighting technicians, and event coordinators frantically setting up floral arrangements and testing the sound system. I bypassed the chaos on the floor and headed straight for the elevated audiovisual booth at the back of the hall. A young technician with a headset and a clipboard was furiously adjusting audio levels on a massive mixing board. I approached him, projecting the absolute unquestionable authority of a high-level corporate event manager. I pulled a crisp $100 bill from my pocket and slid it across the console. I told him I was a private consultant hired by Jamal to run a surprise financial presentation during the keynote speech, and I needed secure, uninterrupted access to the main projection feed. The technician barely blinked. He took the cash, pocketed it smoothly, and pointed to a secondary input terminal on the far right of the desk. He told me I had full override access to the main LED screen dominating the stage. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out a discreet wireless receiver, and plugged it into the high-definition port. I synced it to the hidden tablet in my bag, ensuring I could hijack the visual feed from anywhere in the ballroom at a moment's notice. I tested the connection. A tiny green light illuminated on the receiver, confirming that I held the digital reins to Jamal's vanity project. Tech founders always obsess over their software, but they consistently ignore physical security. It was a fatal oversight. I left the ballroom and walked down to the hotel lobby bar, ordering a sparkling water. I sat in a secluded corner booth and pulled out my secure secondary phone. It vibrated almost immediately. It was an encrypted message from Agent Thomas. He attached a heavily redacted PDF file for my review. I opened the document and smiled. It was a federal arrest warrant signed in black ink by a United States district judge. The charges were explicitly listed in harsh bureaucratic language: wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. These were not civil summons or local police inquiries. These were federal indictments that carried mandatory minimum sentences spanning decades. Thomas sent a follow-up message outlining the tactical logistics. He had 20 plainclothes federal agents staging in the hotel. Some were positioned in the service corridors, others were blending in near the kitchen, and a heavy presence was monitoring the main lobby. Every single exit to the grand ballroom was covered. There would be no dramatic escapes, no slipping out the back door to catch a flight to a non-extradition country. Nobody was leaving that room without federal permission. The cage was locked. I typed a single word in response: acknowledged. I took a cab back to my apartment for the final transformation. I spent the next 2 hours preparing for the performance of a lifetime. I styled my hair in sleek, immaculate waves that framed my face like a dark halo. I applied my makeup with sharp, unyielding precision, utilizing a bold crimson lipstick that matched my intentions. Then I slipped into the blood-red silk gown. The heavy fabric cascaded down my body, the asymmetrical neckline cutting a sharp, dangerous silhouette. I strapped on the towering stilettos and clasped the aggressive geometric jewelry around my neck and wrists. I looked in the full-length mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back at me. The compliant, quiet forensic accountant was completely gone. The broken victim my parents thought they had crushed under their gaslighting was dead. I was a weapon forged from their own greed, and I was primed to strike. I ordered an elite black car service, requesting to be dropped off directly at the hotel VIP entrance. The drive back downtown felt surreal. The city lights blurred past my window, but my mind was laser-focused on the exact sequence of events that needed to unfold. I reviewed my mental script, anticipating my mother's condescension, my father's arrogance, and Jamal's insufferable corporate jargon. I was ready for all of it. They wanted me to witness their success. I was going to force them to witness their own demise. The sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb of the Peninsula Hotel. The valet stepped forward and opened my door. A crowd of minor local influencers and photographers hired by Jamal to fabricate a sense of importance were swarming the entrance, snapping pictures of the arriving guests. The flashbulbs fired in rapid succession, cutting through the evening darkness. I stepped out of the vehicle. The flashing lights caught the brilliant crimson silk of my gown, illuminating the blood-red fabric against the dark Chicago night. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. I raised my chin, squared my shoulders, and walked straight toward the ballroom doors. The heavy brass handles of the grand ballroom doors yielded to the uniformed ushers, opening to reveal a scene of staggering, unearned extravagance. I stepped over the threshold and let the sheer scale of Jamal's financial delusion wash over me. The space was transformed into a techno-utopian wonderland paid for entirely by federal wire fraud. Massive ice sculptures bearing the NovaChain logo slowly melted under pin spotlighting. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of Chicago's wealthiest venture capitalists, real estate moguls, and socialites. Jamal had packed the room with the city's financial elite, desperate to manufacture the illusion of a thriving enterprise. I mentally calculated the cost of the event as I walked across the plush carpet. The open bar, the custom lighting rig, the imported orchids cascading from the ceiling. It was easily $250,000 burning up in a single evening. Every sip taken by these investors was funded by my stolen trust account. Every floral arrangement was another piece of evidence for the prosecution. My blood-red gown parted the sea of black tuxedos and subdued evening dresses. I drew stares from every direction. I was not the defeated, shrinking violet my family had ordered me to be. I was a glaring anomaly in their perfectly curated celebration of theft. It took exactly 40 seconds for my parents to locate the anomaly. I saw Patricia and Richard abandon a conversation with a prominent banking executive the moment they spotted me. They moved through the crowd with the synchronized predatory grace of sharks, scenting blood in the water. My mother reached me first. She did not offer a greeting. Instead, her hand shot out and clamped onto my bare arm, her manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into my skin. She yanked me roughly out of the main walkway, pulling me behind a towering column adorned with white roses. Richard boxed me in from the other side, using his broad shoulders to shield our interaction from the mingling guests. "What are you wearing?" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with barely contained rage. Her eyes raked over my crimson silk dress and the diamond drop earrings catching the light. "I told you to wear something nice, not dress like you are walking a runway. You look like you are begging for attention." I kept my expression perfectly serene, letting my lips curve into a practiced vacuous smile. "You said this was a celebration, Mom. I just wanted to dress for the occasion." Richard leaned in close, the smell of expensive scotch heavy on his breath. "Do not play games with us tonight, Madison," he growled. You are here because we allowed you to be here. You are here to sit quietly at the front table and clap when Jamal speaks. If you try to cause a scene, if you so much as look at one of these investors the wrong way, I will have the valet pull your car around and I will file the conservatorship papers first thing Monday morning. Do you understand me? I looked at my father. The arrogance rolling off him was almost intoxicating knowing what awaited him. He truly believed he held the leash. He truly believed the fabricated psychological evaluation sitting in his home office safe was a shield against the federal government. Smile and act normal. My mother commanded her grip on my arm, tightening until I was sure it would leave bruises. Do not ruin Jamal's big night. He is securing the future of this family. If anyone asks, you are doing fine, you are managing your stress, and you are thrilled for your brother-in-law. I forced my smile to widen, adopting the exact posture of a cowed, obedient daughter. I understand completely, I said, making my voice soft and submissive. I am just here to support the family. I promise I will not do anything to ruin Jamal's presentation. Patricia studied my face for a moment, searching for any sign of defiance. Finding none, she released my arm and smoothed the front of her own designer gown. Good, she said, instantly recovering her high society facade. Now go find your seat at table 1. Brittany is already there. They turned and melted back into the crowd, immediately resuming their performance for the city's elite. I rubbed my arm, feeling the phantom sting of her nails, and stepped back into the flow of the party. As I made my way toward the front of the ballroom, my forensic instincts kicked in. I stopped looking at the expensive decor and started looking for the anomalies. I spotted them almost instantly. The federal agents were exceptionally good, but to someone who knew they were coming, they stood out. The waiter near the emergency exit who had not served a single drink in 10 minutes. The broad-shouldered man in the tailored suit, nursing a club soda at the bar, his eyes tracking the room in distinct methodical quadrants. The woman adjusting a subtle earpiece beneath her hair near the catering doors. Agent Thomas had delivered on his promise. The perimeter was entirely locked down. The net was invisible, but it was drawn tight. No one in Jamal's syndicate was leaving this hotel. I reached table 1, positioned front and center right beneath the massive stage. Brittany was holding court, surrounded by a group of wives of minor tech investors. She was flaunting a massive new diamond necklace, laughing loudly and gesturing with her champagne flute. She paused when she saw me approach, her eyes narrowing as she took in my red gown. "You are late," Madison Brittany said sharply, making sure her audience heard her. "And you are definitely overdressed. We are celebrating tech innovation, not attending a Hollywood premiere." I took my seat, gracefully smoothing the red silk over my knees. "I wanted to make an impression," I replied smoothly. "It is not every day you get to witness history being made." Brittany smirked, satisfied by what she assumed was a compliment to her husband. "Just sit there and pay attention," she said, turning back to her friends. "You might learn something about real success." I picked up a glass of sparkling water from the table and took a slow sip. The internal calm I felt was absolute. The noise of the ballroom, the clinking glasses, the arrogant laughter of my family, it all washed over me like a receding tide. I was sitting in the exact center of the blast radius, completely shielded by the truth. A sharp melodic chime echoed through the venue's massive sound system, cutting through the chatter. The crystal chandeliers overhead began to dim slowly, casting the vast room into a dramatic cinematic darkness. The crowd murmured in anticipation, turning their chairs and directing their attention to the front. A single brilliant white spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the stage. The massive LED screen behind the podium flared to life, projecting the sleek minimalist Nova Chain logo in glowing silver light. From the side of the stage, the man of the hour appeared. Jamal strode out into the spotlight, holding a wireless microphone. He wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than a reliable car, grinning from ear to ear. He looked out over the sea of investors, radiating the absolute, unchecked confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire world. He took his position at the center of the stage, ready to deliver his keynote speech. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Jamal began, his voice amplified to perfection by the expensive sound system. 5 years ago, NovaChain was nothing but a whiteboard concept in a cramped apartment. People told me I was crazy. Traditional financial institutions told me the blockchain revolution was a passing fad, but true visionaries do not ask for permission. We build from the ground up. We disrupt the stagnant systems. We forge new paradigms. The crowd erupted into polite, wealthy applause. At table 1, Brittany was holding her phone high, recording the entire speech for her social media followers. My mother, Patricia, had her hands clasped together under her chin, wearing an expression of rapt adoration. My father, Richard, was nodding sagely, playing the role of the proud patriarch. They were entirely captivated by the monster they had helped create. I took a slow breath, set my water glass down on the crisp linen tablecloth, and simply stood up. No one noticed. The spotlight was blinding, rendering the audience in absolute darkness to those on stage. My family was too hypnotized by the performance to care about my movements. I slipped away from the front row, moving with calculated silence along the perimeter of the grand ballroom. I glided through the shadows, my crimson dress blending into the dimly lit edges of the room, until I reached the elevated area near the audio-visual booth. From my new vantage point, I had a perfect view of the entire room. I could see the plainclothes federal agents standing like statues near the emergency exits. I could see the oblivious investors nodding along to Jamal's empty promises. And I had a direct line of sight to my hidden wireless receiver plugged into the mixing board. Jamal paced across the stage, adopting the casual, relaxed stride of a Silicon Valley billionaire. He held his free hand out palm up, as if offering his wisdom to the masses. In the tech space, we talk a lot about capital. He continued, his voice dripping with manufactured humility. We talk about venture rounds, liquidity, and seed funding. We celebrate the numbers on a balance sheet. But let me tell you a secret. The most valuable currency in this industry is not cryptocurrency. It is not dollars. It is faith. And a few weeks ago, that faith was rewarded. NovaChain officially closed a triumphant $3 million angel investment round. The ballroom erupted into a thunderous round of applause. Investors raised their champagne flutes. I watched Brittany jump to her feet, cheering loudly, her newly purchased diamond necklace throwing refracted light across the ceiling. She beamed with absolute unearned pride. She was cheering for a man who had forged federal documents, completely ignorant of the fact that the money funding this entire spectacle was legally mine. But I did not achieve this alone, Jamal said, lowering his voice to a dramatic, intimate register as the applause died down. He stopped pacing and looked directly down at table 1. When the banks turned me away, when the institutional lenders lacked the vision to see what NovaChain could become, my family stepped up. He pointed directly at Richard and Patricia. The spotlight operator, completely unaware of the irony, widened the beam to illuminate my parents. They smiled for the crowd, soaking in the unearned admiration of Chicago's financial elite. They believed in my genius, Jamal declared, pressing a hand to his chest. They provided the foundational capital that unlocked this massive new era for our company. They sacrificed, they strategized, and they put their own assets on the line because they knew what I was capable of building. They saw the future and they helped me seize it. The sheer audacity of his words was physically sickening. He was literally thanking my parents for helping him steal my identity. He was branding wire fraud and deepfake forgery as visionary family support. He was standing on a stage paid for by my stolen trust fund, bragging about a commercial loan he secured by pledging my drained accounts to a federal bank. Every single syllable leaving his mouth was a recorded confession. He was weaving his own federal indictment live on stage, and he thought he was delivering an inspirational keynote. He was so deeply intoxicated by his own lies that he actually believed he had outsmarted the federal government. He believed that hacking a biometric lock and fabricating a psychiatric evaluation made him a titan of industry. He was a thief in a tailored suit, and his entire empire was constructed on a foundation of digital quicksand. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the small, sleek remote control synced to my hidden tablet. I wrapped my fingers around the smooth plastic, feeling the cold, hard reality of the power I held. I ran my thumb over the primary activation button. The digital guillotine was loaded. I looked down at Agent Thomas's operatives positioned by the heavy brass doors. They were perfectly still, waiting for the signal. "I ask all of you to raise a glass," Jamal announced, lifting his own crystal champagne flute toward the ceiling. The room followed suit, a wave of sparkling glassware catching the light. Raise a glass to innovation. Raise a glass to the future. But most importantly, raise a glass to family. Because without family, none of this would be possible. To family, the crowd echoed back a chorus of wealthy elites, unknowingly toasting to a federal crime. I did not raise a glass. I tightened my grip on the remote control. I stepped out of the protective darkness near the audiovisual booth. The heavy crimson silk of my gown swept against the floor as I walked down the center aisle, moving directly into the harsh, brilliant glare of the stage lights. I walked with deliberate, measured steps. The sharp staccato of my heels on the marble floor cut through the lingering echoes of the crowd's toast. People at the edge of the aisle noticed me first. They lowered their champagne flutes, their eyes tracking the brilliant red silk of my dress. A ripple of confusion washed over the audience, spreading toward the front of the room like a physical wave. By the time I reached the midpoint of the center aisle, the lively chatter had died down to a confused, heavy murmur. At table 1, my family finally registered my presence. Patricia dropped her hands from her face, her practiced smile instantly freezing into a mask of pure terror. Richard stood up halfway, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. Brittany spilled her drink down the front of her designer dress, her mouth hanging open in shock. They had ordered me to sit quietly at the table, wrapped in my supposed defeat. They had weaponized my mental health to force my compliance. Seeing me march toward the stage, radiating absolute defiance, shattered their illusion of control in real time. Jamal stood frozen under the blinding spotlight. His charismatic smile wavered, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. He looked to my father for help, but Richard was too stunned to move. I did not stop. I climbed the short flight of stairs leading to the stage, the heavy fabric of my crimson gown pooling around my ankles. Jamal tried to recover, adopting a forced, nervous chuckle for the benefit of the investors watching us. "Madison, what are you doing up here?" Jamal whispered through clenched teeth, leaning away from the microphone so the room would not hear his panic. "This is not the time for a family toast. Go sit back down before you ruin everything." I did not answer him. I stepped directly into his personal space, invading the spotlight. I reached out and firmly grasped the wireless microphone. Jamal tightened his grip for a fraction of a second, his fragile ego warring with his desperate desire to avoid a public scene. But my eyes locked onto his, conveying a cold, clinical threat that made his fingers go completely slack. I smoothly pulled the microphone from his hand. I turned to face the sea of Chicago's financial elite. The ballroom was completely silent now. Hundreds of wealthy investors, venture capitalists, and socialites stared up at me, waiting for the punchline of what they assumed was an eccentric presentation. They expected a heartwarming story about sibling support. I was about to give them a forensic audit. "Jamal is right," I said, my voice echoing through the massive sound system. My tone was calm, steady, and utterly ruthless. Family is everything. It is the foundation of trust. It is the bedrock of loyalty. And in the case of NovaChain, it is the sole reason this company is not currently filing for bankruptcy. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The energy in the room turned brittle and electric. Jamal took a step toward me, reaching out to reclaim the microphone, but I pivoted slightly, keeping it entirely out of his reach. For instance, I continued, letting my words ring out with absolute clarity. My father and Jamal used deepfake video technology to forge my biometric signature. They bypassed a federal electronic notary to steal $800,000 from my locked trust fund. They did this in the middle of the night to use my stolen cash as liquid collateral. That stolen collateral is the exact reason Jamal was able to secure the $3 million commercial loan you are all celebrating tonight. The ballroom went dead silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning humming in the vents above. It was a suffocating, terrifying quiet. Investors slowly lowered their glasses. Venture capitalists exchanged horrified glances. The word fraud is a death sentence in the financial sector, and I had just dropped a nuclear bomb right in the middle of their cocktail hour. Jamal went completely pale. His arrogant tech founder persona evaporated instantly, leaving behind a terrified criminal in a tailored suit. He looked like a cornered animal searching for a way out. From the front row, absolute chaos erupted. Richard charged the stage. He vaulted up the stairs, his face purple with rage, completely abandoning his refined patriarch image. He lunged toward me, waving his hands frantically at the audience in a desperate bid for damage control. "Do not listen to her!" My father bellowed, his voice echoing across the room without a microphone. "She is sick. She is severely mentally ill. She is off her medication and having a paranoid manic episode. Somebody call security and get her an ambulance. She does not know what she is saying." Patricia was standing at table 1, clutching her chest, performing a theatrical display of maternal distress for the surrounding investors. She cried out about how hard it was to care for a troubled daughter, playing the victim with practiced ease. Brittany was shouting at the event staff to cut the microphone, her voice shrill and panicked as she waved her arms at the audiovisual booth. Richard reached me, grabbing my arm just as my mother had done earlier in the evening. His grip was bruising, his fingers digging into my skin as he tried to physically pry the microphone from my hand. He thought his booming voice and false medical claims would be enough to discredit me. He thought the investors would pity him for having a crazy daughter. He thought he could still control the narrative and suppress the truth. I did not pull away. I did not fight him physically. I simply raised my left hand, the one holding the small black audiovisual remote control I had synced earlier. I looked my father dead in the eye, gave him a razor-sharp smile, and firmly clicked the primary activation button. I looked my father dead in the eye, gave him a razor-sharp smile, and firmly clicked the primary activation button. The massive LED screen dominating the stage behind us flickered with a sharp electronic hum. The glowing silver logo of Nova Chain vanished instantly into the dark. In its place, a blindingly bright, high-contrast spreadsheet illuminated the vast ballroom. It was the master directory of Project Icarus. The sheer scale of the projection made the financial data absolutely impossible to ignore. Every single cell, every highlighted column, and every timestamp was magnified to the size of a billboard. The crowd gasped in unison as the first slide transitioned into view. It was not a chaotic collage of numbers, but a meticulously structured presentation designed for a federal jury. I had stripped away all complex accounting jargon and laid out the anatomy of a federal crime in plain English. My father froze mid-sentence. His bruising grip on my arm went completely slack as he slowly turned around to look at the screen. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant patriarch he had been seconds ago. The first slide displayed the biometric verification video Jamal had used to bypass the strict banking security. Right next to the looping video was the raw metadata analysis. A bright red box zoomed in on the pixelation blur around my jawline. Beside it sat a waveform chart perfectly matching the audio track to a birthday message I had sent my sister weeks prior. The text in bold, unforgiving letters read, "Synthetic media, deepfake forgery." Jamal staggered backwards, staring up at his own digital footprint exposed for the entire world to see. He wiped a hand across his sweating forehead, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The presentation automatically advanced to the second slide. The electronic notary log filled the massive screen. It highlighted the specific IP address used to authorize the fraudulent power of attorney. A side-by-side comparison placed the IP address directly over the commercial lease agreement for Jamal's startup headquarters. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he executed the heist from his own corporate desk. The polite whispers in the audience rapidly escalated into a loud, frantic buzz of panic. Elite venture capitalists began pointing at the screen. Men in tailored tuxedos pulled out their phones, snapping photos and recording the unfolding disaster. The room was witnessing the live execution of a corporate career. The third slide delivered the lethal financial blow. It was a beautifully animated flowchart mapping the exact trajectory of the stolen funds. An aggressive red arrow traced $800,000, leaving my personal trust fund and landing directly in a collateral holding account at a Manhattan federal bank. Then a massive green arrow showed the resulting $3 million commercial loan dispersing straight into Jamal's corporate accounts. From there, the money fractured into dozens of smaller, highly incriminating streams. The screen displayed the exact routing numbers for Richard's delinquent property tax payments. It showed the wire transfer for the escrow deposit on the luxury penthouse my mother had been bragging about all evening. It even highlighted the cashier check receipt used to purchase Brittany's matte black Mercedes. Every single luxury they were parading around the ballroom tonight was visibly tethered to the initial act of wire fraud. I had tracked every dime of the money laundering phase and put it on a 70-foot screen. The investors were not just murmuring anymore, they were actively backing away from the stage. The financial backers who had clinked glasses with Jamal minutes ago were now treating him like a highly contagious biohazard. In the corporate world, associating with a known fraudster is a career-ending move. Guests grabbed their expensive coats from the backs of their chairs. Women in evening gowns whispered frantically into their cell phones, likely calling their own legal teams to pull any pending investments before their names were attached to the scandal. Jamal was entirely isolated in the spotlight, unable to formulate a single cohesive sentence. His visionary persona had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My father stumbled back, grasping the edge of the wooden podium to keep himself from collapsing. His chest heaved as he looked out at the fleeing investors. The society friends he had spent decades trying to impress were now staring at him with absolute disgust. He opened his mouth to shout another lie, to claim the presentation was a fabrication created by a sick woman, but the automated slideshow beat him to it. The screen flashed one final time. The detailed flowcharts and IP logs vanished, replaced by a solid black background. In the absolute center of the screen, burning in massive aggressive red typography, was a direct banking alert from the Federal Reserve Gateway. It read fraudulent transaction, under federal investigation. The sheer finality of that red text broke the remaining syndicate members. Down at table 1, Brittany completely lost her mind. The golden child, utterly oblivious to how the criminal justice system actually worked, stood up and pointed a trembling finger at the stage. Her voice was shrill and hysterical, cutting sharply through the chaotic noise of the panicked ballroom. "You are lying!" Brittany shrieked, clutching her heavy diamond necklace as if the jewels could somehow protect her from reality. "You cannot do anything to us. The money is already in our accounts. Jamal secured the funding and we spent it. You cannot touch us." Her desperate, unhinged confession echoed off the high ceilings, providing the final, undeniable verbal confirmation of their guilt. She had just admitted to receiving and spending the proceeds of a federal crime in front of hundreds of high-profile witnesses. I looked down at my sister, offering her nothing but a cold, satisfied stare. At that exact second, the heavy brass doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. A dozen men and women wearing dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bold, bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation poured into the grand ballroom. They did not shout or draw weapons, but their entry carried the overwhelming, suffocating weight of absolute authority. They moved with synchronized military precision. In a matter of seconds, they formed a human barricade across the main entrance, securing the perimeter, while secondary units locked down the catering doors and the emergency fire escapes. The high society gala had officially been classified as an active federal crime scene. The panic among the Chicago financial elite was instantaneous and absolute. The polite, sophisticated murmurs of the wealthy dissolved into a cacophony of panicked shouting. Crystal champagne flutes shattered against the marble floor as investors dropped their drinks and scrambled to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. Women in expensive evening gowns tripped over their own hemlines, rushing toward the exits, only to be firmly turned back by unyielding federal agents. The very people my family had desperately tried to impress were now frantically dialing their corporate defense attorneys, desperate to scrub their names from the guest list. Agent Thomas walked straight down the center aisle, moving with the heavy, unhurried stride of a predator that had already trapped its prey. The blinding glare from the massive red warning on the projection screen washed over his face. He did not look at the fleeing socialites or the spilled caviar. He kept his eyes locked entirely on the stage. He pulled his gold federal badge from his breast pocket and held it high, the metal catching the stage lights. "Nobody moves!" Thomas projected his voice, a booming command that sliced right through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. "FBI Financial Crimes Division. This event is shut down." Jamal finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The reality of a 20-year federal sentence suddenly crashed through his delusion of grandeur. The tech visionary persona completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified con artist. He looked at Thomas, then looked toward the darkened service hallway near the kitchen. Survival instinct took over. Jamal dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, piercing feedback screech that made the remaining guests cover their ears. He scrambled down the side stairs and bolted toward the catering exit, his designer leather shoes slipping wildly on the polished floor. He did not make it 10 feet. Two broad-shouldered tactical agents intercepted him with ruthless efficiency. They did not negotiate or ask him to surrender. The lead agent lunged forward, driving a shoulder directly into Jamal's chest. The impact lifted Jamal off his feet and sent him crashing backward into one of the massive melting ice sculptures bearing the Nova Chain logo. The heavy ice shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, cascading over Jamal as he hit the floor with a sickening thud. The agents were on top of him instantly. They pinned his arms behind his back, pressing his face hard against the wet, freezing carpet. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the room. It was the absolute definitive sound of his empire collapsing. Richard witnessed the violent takedown of his son-in-law and completely lost whatever fragile grip he had left on his composure. The country club patriarch, still clinging to the absurd belief that his wealth made him immune to consequences, stepped toward Agent Thomas. Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate a veteran federal investigator. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Richard bellowed, his face flushed purple with indignant rage. "I am a respected investor in this city. You cannot simply barge in here and assault my family. I want your badge number. I will have your job for this. I will call the mayor." Thomas did not even break his stride. He gave a sharp nod to a pair of agents flanking him. Before my father could take another breath, an agent grabbed Richard by the collar of his expensive tuxedo jacket, spun him around with startling velocity, and slammed his chest forcefully onto a high-top cocktail table. Glass shattered. A vase of white orchids snapped in half. The sticky residue of spilled cocktails soaked directly into Richard's tailored suit as the agent forced his head down against the table. Richard gasped for air, his blustering threats dissolving into pathetic, wheezing coughs as the cold steel handcuffs locked securely around his wrists. Down at table 1, Brittany was completely hysterical. She watched her husband dragged up from a pile of shattered ice, and her father pinned to a table like a common street criminal. She grabbed her hair, screaming uncontrollably, the heavy diamond necklace she had purchased with my stolen money swinging wildly around her neck. She looked toward the stage, her tear-streaked face twisting in absolute disbelief, as an agent approached her, reading her the Miranda rights and ordering her to surrender her personal belongings. But it was Patricia who delivered the most pathetic performance of the night. My mother, the woman who had coldly slid a fabricated psychiatric evaluation across a kitchen island just weeks ago, completely broke. The refined, untouchable high society matriarch shattered into 1,000 pieces of desperate terror. She dropped to the floor, ruining her incredibly expensive designer gown. She crawled on her hands and knees through the spilled champagne and broken crystal, dragging herself toward the edge of the stage where I stood. She looked up at me, her face contorted in absolute raw panic. Tears and black mascara streamed down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. The arrogance was gone. The condescension was gone. She was finally staring at the very real, very terrifying consequences of her own actions. "Madison, please," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking as she reached a trembling manicured hand up toward the edge of the stage. "Tell them to stop. Tell them there has been a mistake. We are your family. We are your blood. We just borrowed the money to get through a rough patch. We were going to give it all back. Please, my baby, you cannot let them take us away. We just borrowed it." I stood perfectly still under the bright stage lights, the heavy crimson silk of my gown brushing against the floor. I looked down at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who had tried to gaslight me into a mental institution to steal my future. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I felt nothing but the cold, absolute certainty of justice. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking directly into my mother's terrified, weeping eyes. I made sure my voice was crystal clear, cutting through her hysterical sobbing, so that every remaining agent and investor in the room could hear my final verdict. The federal government doesn't have a code for borrowing with a forged signature. Mom, I said, my tone absolute ice. Enjoy your 20-year sentence. I turned my back on the stage. The heavy crimson silk of my gown swept the floor as I walked out of the grand ballroom. I did not look back at the flashing police lights illuminating the hotel lobby. I did not turn around to watch the federal agents escort my father and my brother-in-law through the service elevators in handcuffs. I simply hailed a cab, returned to my quiet apartment, and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. 6 months passed. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding inevitability that crushes everything caught in its gears. Jamal and Richard were denied bail at their initial arraignment. The presiding judge labeled them severe flight risks, given the scale of the wire fraud and the offshore cryptocurrency wallets the FBI managed to decrypt during the raid. They traded their tailored designer suits for standard-issue orange jumpsuits. They sat in a federal holding facility staring down the barrel of maximum sentences. The prosecutors offered absolutely no plea deals. My forensic dossier had been too thorough. I left them with zero legal leverage. My mother avoided immediate lockup, but her life was entirely destroyed. Patricia was indicted as an accessory to federal wire fraud and identity theft. She was out on a heavily monitored bond, forced to surrender her passport and wear a bulky GPS ankle monitor. The high society friends she had spent decades trying to impress abandoned her instantly. The country club revoked her membership. Her phone stopped ringing. She was a toxic pariah in the very city she once claimed to rule. But the criminal charges were only half of the execution. The financial fallout was absolute and devastating. The moment the FBI flagged the Manhattan Bank about the fraudulent collateral, the institution enacted a catastrophic debt recovery protocol. Because the $3 million commercial loan was secured through an act of federal wire fraud, the bank recalled the debt immediately. My stolen $800,000 was protected under federal fraud regulations. The moment the deepfake forgery was legally confirmed, the bank was required to restore my funds completely. My trust account was replenished in full, complete with the accumulated interest. To recoup their massive losses from Jamal's dispersed loan, the bank aggressively targeted every single asset the syndicate had touched with the dirty money. The civil asset forfeiture was a bloodbath. Brittany woke up one crisp Tuesday morning to find federal agents towing her custom matte black Mercedes right out of her driveway. The luxury downtown penthouse my parents had put a down payment on was seized by the federal government, the escrow funds completely liquidated to cover banking penalties. Jamal's corporate bank accounts were frozen and drained to zero. But the crown jewel of their financial collapse was the North Shore mansion. Richard was already drowning in property tax liens before the heist. Once the federal indictments hit, the remaining equity in the estate was vaporized. The mansion had been used as collateral in secondary loans tied to Jamal's business network. With the primary borrowers facing federal prison, the bank initiated a hostile foreclosure. They seized the sprawling property to auction it off, desperate to recover whatever capital they could salvage from the wreckage of Jamal's fraudulent tech empire. Brittany was left completely penniless. The golden child who had spent her entire life using my parents' money as an impenetrable shield suddenly found herself facing imminent eviction from a foreclosed property she no longer legally owned. Her husband was facing 20 years in federal prison. Her parents were facing financial ruin and criminal conspiracy charges. She had no marketable skills, no legitimate income, and her credit score was decimated by her association with Jamal's frozen accounts. She tried reaching out to me twice. She left desperate, weeping voicemails begging for a temporary loan to secure a rental apartment. She claimed she was an innocent victim in Jamal's scheme. I deleted the voicemails without listening to the end. She had explicitly told me to enjoy the spectacle of her husband making money work. She had mocked my career and told me not to be bitter. Now she was learning exactly how the real world works when you fund your lifestyle with federal felonies. I did not just sit back and watch them lose the mansion. I had one final fatal move to make. The bank moved fast to liquidate the North Shore property. Distressed real estate tied to highly publicized federal criminal cases are toxic assets. The bank just wanted the mansion off their balance sheets before the fiscal quarter ended. They listed the sprawling estate at a massive discount, pricing it at a fraction of its actual market value. However, the listing came with strict stipulations. The bank demanded a buyer with immediate verifiable liquidity. They wanted no mortgages, no contingencies, and a closing window of less than 14 days. They wanted raw cash. I smiled as I monitored the commercial real estate listing from my office terminal. I had spent my entire childhood watching my parents use that house as a monument to their fake superiority. It was the physical embodiment of their arrogance, the very place where they had slid a fabricated psychiatric evaluation across the kitchen island and threatened to lock me in a conservatorship. I contacted my real estate attorney and instructed him to establish an anonymous blind trust under a generic corporate limited liability company. I wanted my name buried under layers of legal paperwork, so the bank and the current occupants would have absolutely no idea who the buyer was until the ink was dry on the deed. Once the LLC was established, I initiated a wire transfer. I took the exact asking price directly from my legally restored federal insured trust fund. I submitted an all-cash, no contingency offer to the bank. Given the speed and liquidity of the transaction, the bank accepted the offer within 2 hours. I bought my parents' foreclosed mansion from the bank for pennies on the dollar. The title was officially transferred to my corporate entity. The bank issued the final eviction notice to the current occupants, giving Patricia and Brittany exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises. The stage was perfectly set for the final eviction. The 48-hour eviction window expired on a crisp Thursday morning. The Chicago air carried a sharp bite, mirroring the exact temperature of my mood as I navigated my car toward the North Shore suburbs one final time. I did not hire an escort or bring a police detail. I wanted this moment to be entirely personal. I wanted to look them in the eye as the final curtain fell on their delusions of grandeur. I turned onto the familiar sweeping driveway of the estate. There were no luxury sports cars parked out front today. Jamal's leased vehicles had been seized weeks ago. Instead, a rusted moving van sat idling near the curb. The heavy oak front doors were propped wide open. My mother and sister were struggling to drag bulging black trash bags across the pristine marble threshold. The visual poetry of the scene was almost too perfect. Patricia, wearing sweatpants and a stained cashmere sweater, looked entirely stripped of her country club arrogance. The heavy GPS monitoring ankle bracelet secured around her leg was clearly visible, a permanent reminder of her pending federal trial. Brittany was sobbing silently, struggling to carry a cardboard box, overflowing with whatever cheap items the federal asset forfeiture agents had allowed them to keep. I parked my car directly in front of the entryway, cutting the engine. The crunch of my tires on the gravel caused them both to freeze. Patricia dropped the trash bag she was dragging. It hit the pavement with a heavy thud, spilling a tangle of cheap hangers and old shoes onto the driveway. I stepped out of the vehicle. I wore my signature navy blue blazer and sensible pumps, returning to the forensic accountant armor that had always served me so well. I walked slowly up the walkway, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the stone. Brittany took a step back, hiding behind the cardboard box in her arms. Her face was red and splotchy. She had lost her husband, her stolen car, and her entire identity. She had absolutely no fight left in her. But Patricia still possessed a desperate, toxic pride. She straightened her posture, trying to summon the ghost of the terrifying matriarch she used to be. She glared at me, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. "What are you doing here, Madison?" Patricia demanded, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "Have you not done enough? You ruined your father. You destroyed Jamal. You left your own sister homeless. Are you here to gloat while the bank throws us out on the street?" I stopped at the bottom of the grand stone steps. I looked at the sprawling mansion, then back at the woman who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal my future. "I am not here to gloat," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "I am here to conduct a final property inspection." Patricia scoffed a bitter, hollow sound. A property inspection. You do not work for the bank. You have absolutely no authority here. Get off this property before I call the police for trespassing. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. It was a brand new master key, freshly cut by the locksmith I had hired just hours ago. I held it up so the morning sunlight caught the metal. I do not work for the bank. Mom. I agreed. I am the sole owner of the anonymous corporate entity that bought this estate out of foreclosure yesterday afternoon. The bank does not own this house anymore. I do. The color drained from Patricia's face instantly. Her eyes darted from the brass key in my hand to the imposing facade of the mansion behind her. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. She was not just being evicted by a faceless financial institution. She was being thrown out into the cold by the very daughter she had deemed entirely worthless. You bought the house, Brittany whispered, her voice trembling in absolute disbelief. I bought it for pennies on the dollar, I confirmed, looking directly at my sister. The bank was desperate to unload a toxic asset tied to a massive federal wire fraud investigation. It turns out that cash liquidity is king in the real estate market. You are a monster, Patricia hissed, her hands shaking uncontrollably. You planned this from the very beginning. You set us up to lose everything just so you could swoop in and steal our home. You are a cold, calculated monster. I took a slow step up the stairs, closing the distance between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had the ultimate authority of the truth. I did not steal anything, I said smoothly. I legally purchased a foreclosed property using the federally protected funds you tried to drain from me in the middle of the night. I am not a monster. I am just managing assets, Mom. Exactly like you taught me. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to hurl another insult, but no words came out. The absolute finality of my statement crushed the last remaining breath from her lungs. She looked down at the trash bags at her feet, realizing she had absolutely zero leverage, zero power, and zero escape. Your 48-hour eviction window expires in exactly 10 minutes, I told them, gesturing toward the street. I suggest you finish loading your garbage bags into the van. I am locking the doors. I stepped past my mother and sister walking through the grand entryway of the mansion. The interior was completely empty. The federal agents and bank liquidators had stripped the house bare, removing the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, and the imported rugs. It was nothing but empty rooms and echoing walls. It was a blank slate. I turned around and faced the front doors. Patricia and Brittany were dragging their bags down the driveway, their heads bowed in total defeat. They did not look back. They loaded their miserable belongings into the rusted van and drove away, disappearing down the street and out of my life permanently. I pulled the heavy oak doors shut. The solid, satisfying click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the empty foyer. The house was secure. The estate was mine. The syndicate was completely destroyed. I walked back to my car and settled into the driver's seat. The silence in the cabin was profound and deeply comforting. I reached into my purse and pulled out my cell phone. I tapped the screen and opened my secure banking application. The biometric scanner flashed, reading my facial geometry. It did not glitch. It did not fail. It recognized me perfectly. The dashboard loaded in a fraction of a second. There were no glaring red banners. There were no fabricated compliance holds. The screen displayed my fully restored trust account balance, sitting comfortably at over $800,000, bolstered by the accumulated federal interest. Right below the balance, printed in bright, vibrant green text, was a single beautiful phrase: access granted. I locked the screen, placed the phone on the passenger seat, and started the engine. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the estate, leaving the empty mansion behind me. I had a busy day ahead at the office, tracking down corporate fraud and balancing the ledgers. I drove toward the Chicago skyline entirely free, completely victorious, and ready for whatever the numbers revealed next. Madison's journey teaches us a profound lesson: shared DNA does not excuse toxic behavior. We are often conditioned to believe we must endlessly forgive our family regardless of the cost to our well-being. However, when those meant to protect you become predators, trying to destroy your future setting, Ironclad boundaries is not cruel. It is pure survival. True family is built on mutual respect, not financial manipulation and gaslighting. It takes immense courage to shatter a destructive illusion and rightfully reclaim your independence. Have you ever had to enforce strict boundaries to protect your peace from toxic relatives? Comment below.